If I was an investor, I would not even look at whether it's science-backed. I would really look at amount of people that are coming back and buying your product.
Welcome to Build a Business Worth Buying, the podcast where seasoned entrepreneurs, M&A experts, and world-class operators share behind-the-scenes stories of building, scaling, and selling remarkable businesses. I'm your host, Aaron Allpeter, and every week I sit down with people shaping the world of acquisitions, founders who've cashed out, buyers with bold strategies, and advisors who help make deals happen. This is not a podcast for beginners. It's for those who know the grind and want actionable insights to make their next big move. Get ready to take notes, rethink your strategy, and hear untold stories of what it takes to build a business worth buying. Today's guest is Dr. Leah Ramachandra. She's a scientist turned beauty entrepreneur who was born in Russia but raised in the Netherlands and trained extensively in pharmacy and analytical chemistry. Today, she's the founder and CEO of Epilinks by Dr. Leah, a skincare and cosmetics company formulated for people with sensitive skin, allergies, autoimmune conditions, and chronic dermatological challenges. Our conversation today really focused on beauty as a case study to tackle deeper questions for founders building toward an exit. And really, when does scientific rigor actually matter in enterprise value? And what is simply marketing? Does it actually matter? We explore the kinds of validation that actually carry weight in diligence, what really moves a multiple, and how founders think about allocating capital between science and execution. Leah, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we met a couple months ago at Beauty Connect, and I was just so impressed with your background and your approach to science-backed beauty. And so I kind of want to start there. When founders talk, especially in beauty, about being science-backed, what does that actually mean?
So it can mean a lot of different things. And also it can mean nothing. It can mean just pure marketing ploy to say it's science-backed because the ingredients I use are scientifically developed, or there is some study 10 years ago that was done on the ingredient I use. I think what we would like to see and hear when I use science-backed is that, number one, I use my background as a PharmD and a PhD in drug development on how I develop the drugs, right? One of the things that it is developed with a specific skin concern in mind. And it is developed, in my case, with high quality ingredients and without all the allergens that may trigger sensitivities in people with sensitive skin. Then, of course, we look at the ingredients and what does science show over the years on how they work. And there are also new ingredients that always coming up, that biotech derived with sometimes not even much science, but they're new ingredients that are proven in trials to do specific good things to the cells. And of course, if you take it a step higher, are the clinical trials that are done with a specific product on 30, 50 healthy subjects. But again, those clinical trials can be very subjective. Just to start there.
Yeah, so it's not even the fact that they had clinical trials that result of it being science-backed. I mean, I always come back to, and this is a true story, I met someone who on the label was saying, oh yeah, we use dihydrogen oxide. And I'm like, dihydrogen oxide? You mean H2O? And they're like, yeah. And it's just like, you're using water and you're calling it something scientific. And so you're right, there is this big gulf between claiming it's science-backed and being more of a marketing ploy versus it sounds like even doing scientific things and not actually having the science rigor. So how do you think about the bench line for a brand? If I'm building a business or I'm evaluating a business, what do I look for to determine if this is actually science-backed or it's just more science fluff?
So I think, just to take a step back, if I was an investor or if I was an acquirer, I would not even look at whether it's science-backed, what did they do. I would really look at amount of people that are coming back and buying your product, right? Sometimes when you look at Rod, like Hailey Bieber brand that was acquired, I mean, I don't know if there's much science-backed, it's makeup, but people love it. It feels great. They have now millions of people that buy it and come back and buy it again, right? So if I was an investor, that's the only numbers I would look. And if those numbers really work, and the company revenue is great, the people are coming, they have a good margin and they're profitable, then I will look, okay, what does differentiate this brand from others? And if we look at skincare brands, then I would say, okay, they claim all this science-backed ingredients or clinical trials. How are these studies done and what is really in there? And at the end, even if the study is done and it is very subjective, if it works and people buy it and there's no toxic products in there, which I don't think in this day and age with Mokra, brands will survive if they will put on purpose any toxic products in there, then I think that's a great brand. So I think science-backed is great to have. It's more like a foundation, like good ingredients, good science, good clinical trials, maybe even subjective. It's really, I think the measure is, are you selling your product once and no one buys it again? Or how often people are returning to buy your product and how much they love it and what are the real reviews are saying.
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, you have to have that baseline fundamental acceptance from the consumer in order to say, yeah, we're going to go out and buy this. But I feel like sometimes if you tie your brand to an ideal, you have to constantly be pushing that ideal. Otherwise, you end up being stale. So, for example, I always go back to sustainability, and I was close with the founders at Seventh Generation for a time, and they put a lot of effort into starting that business around this idea of being more sustainable. And so they were the first ones to say, let's use recycled paper in paper towels. Let's do, all of these things that would look to be table stakes today. And they've kind of struggled as of late because the rest of the market has caught up, right? The rest of the market is default sustainable as well.
Everyone is doing it now, yes.
Right. And so it's like if that was your edge, then you've either got to do one of two things. It's one, you've got to consistently pushing the boundary to be the most sustainable, which means that perhaps the business doesn't grow as big as it could, because you're a little bit more expensive. You're doing things that haven't been done before. You're a real change maker, or you've got to find something else to matter. And so I'm just curious your thoughts here on these brands that stick into saying that we have a unique peptide, or we have some sort of unique formulation, or we're cutting edge science. Is there a risk there that, from a branding perspective, if you don't continue to build on that, that you end up in a situation where everyone else is using that peptide or everyone else is using that formulation, and so you don't become as special, and then therefore that asset is more risky?
When we launched, I only focused on being gluten-free skincare. 5 years ago, gluten-free skincare, no one talked about it. Everyone is like, what is that? So I had a huge following of customers who had celiac disease, where you can't even eat a trace of gluten. It's not negotiable. It's not a sensitivity. It's a disease. So that was great. But at a certain point, now almost everyone is gluten-free. Like you couldn't just sustain that. So you need to constantly reassess, okay, who is my customer and what do they want? And what I found that our customers had a lot of allergies, had a lot of sensitive skin. So I said, if that's my customer, I need to reinvent and not just say gluten-free, gluten-free. Let's eliminate all the allergens. Simple like soy and cinnamon and propylene glycol, things that you can still find in almost every skincare product. Recently, this year, we found that our audience has all this allergy, sensitive skin, but also it's women who are 35 plus. They go into perimenopause, they grew with us. So I'm like, how do I not just give them a promise of clean skincare, but also give them a promise you don't need to do this because nothing else works. You can take out skincare, but also it will give you that glow, right? So I think to your point, you need to have something strong, right? That like my audience can't use anything else but us because they have all these allergies. But at a certain point, there will be other ones that coming in. So how do I reinvent myself and not just focus on that message, but also give them really, really good skin and give them a promise of something more and grow with your audience through the transition that they are going through. So I completely agree with you. I think when you look at the brand, even not in skincare, that focused mainly on giving back or on sustainability, they always rebranded to have a true loyal customer base.
Yeah, and it's a rebrand not because those things are no longer important, but because they're trying to find that differentiator that's there. And I imagine just with your business and other businesses that you've advised that it could be pretty tempting, especially when you're prepping for an exit and you're 2 or 3 years out, that you cut back on R&D or you try to you harvest a little bit more cash to raise your EBIT multiple. I mean, do you have any advice for how high should R&D be if you've kind of staked this position as a brand that we're going to constantly push the envelope, we want to be allergen free completely, and so we've got to come up and invent new things. Is there a threshold for how much one should be investing in R&D in order to be at a healthy level?
I wish there was. I don't have an answer to that. Like I always now say, if you're not profitable, you should not be investing in anything, but focus on the profitability. Because the time where grow at any cost and be minus 5 million is done, right? So I feel like if this year you're breaking even, become profitable, and then decide where are those dollars need to be invested. And if your formulas are working, I would say don't reinvent something new if people love those formulas and buy and they can be using them for years. When I look at my business, profitability is the key. And then, of course, if you have a little bit money to play around, yes, you can invent a new formula if there is a need for it, or you can optimize the current one. But I think focusing on spreading the word and getting more customers to enjoy good products that you make is really the key.
It makes a lot of sense that if you're trying to protect profitability, you kind of pull back on that and invest less. Is there a maximum threshold that you think a company should be investing? I mean, is it something where you take 90% of your profits and you're pouring it back into R&D because you're looking to, I guess, what's that threshold that you look at and say, well, 0 is probably not enough, but 95% is too much?
Definitely too much. So I will give you an example. I spent my previous life in the medical part of the pharmaceutical industry. I was in R&D, and I always said, if the product is great, it will sell itself, right? Until I went to more marketing side, and I'm like, it doesn't matter if the product is the most amazing product, even for cancer patients, which is like they need it. If there is no awareness and marketing behind it, you will never sell it. So now with even my scientific degrees, I say, okay, I would then maybe invest 5% in the R&D. If you have 30% that you want to invest somewhere, I would say 5% R&D, 25% marketing.
Okay, that's a helpful framework. Could you just give us a bit of a crash course in terms of if I am looking to shore up my scientific credentials, what do I need to do in order to make sure I have a strong clinical study basis? And are there any other things beyond just a traditional clinical study that I should be thinking about?
So obviously there is a minimum requirement for the safety and stability, right? So you obviously have to do the repeated exposure testing. So you need to make sure that your product is stable, whether it's now in the winter in like minus temperature to really like 80 or 100 degrees. And of course, you need to make sure there's no mold growing in there. So that's something that's non-negotiable and you have to do it. But when you want to take it further and say, oh, 99% of people experienced enhanced moisture or glow or radiance, whatever claims you want to do, you don't necessarily need to educate yourself much on those claims as long as you find appropriate service provider that's reputable, that's not just like you found someone on the street and they are doing your clinical trial, but somebody reputable. And there are a couple in US, if you're looking in US, that like I know you can trust. So I would then talk with them and say, that's my budget and these are the claims I want to make. And then they will be able to advise whether they do a subjective study where they give the product to the subject or to a person, and then they will say, oh, yes, after 3 weeks, I see it's more hydrated. Or if you do a study where you look at if your skin tone is more even. So they will tell you, okay, it's 20 or 30 patients to be significant. We can do instruments or we can do subjective analysis. But please remember, some people say, oh, it's a clinical study for a skincare product, like it was done with a medical product. That's nowhere near, right? So, and we talk about clinical study that would cost you between $30 to maybe $60,000, $70,000. Even skincare product in dermatology offices or FDA approved, then you're talking about 100, 200,000 to few $1 million studies, right? That's not the case usually in clinical trials done with the skincare over-the-counter OTC products. So basically that we just can sell and not FDA approved. So there is a big difference. Just go to ChatGPT and you can easily educate yourself. What is the clinical trial for skincare product? What claims shall I make? And just find the right service provider that can do it. In the world of AI, we can educate ourselves a lot on that without even having any scientific knowledge.
Yeah. I think as a consumer, it can be pretty intimidating to see all these claims to say, oh, I should be using vitamin C, or I should be using a peptide or hyaluronic acid or something, things like that. And it almost feels like you have to become a bit of an expert to understand what you're looking at on a product and if it's good or not. And so this idea of it being science-backed or clinically approved is a badge of honor. Like it is a marketing element that's there. What do you tell consumers that they should be thinking about in order to understand, like, is this something that I can trust, or is it more pseudoscience?
What I tell, and maybe I'm not necessarily the standard here, when we do our focus groups or when we do like TikTok lives or here I'm in LA, we do a lot of like skincare educational parties where a lot of women get together and I answer questions. I always say, look at the ingredients, look at the ingredients, then of course look at the company. And now, even without scientific background, you can just put them in, like I said, ChatGPT, Gemini, etc., and you can understand. My 11-year-old son, he just says, what are you using? He puts those ingredients in ChatGPT and says, is there anything toxic? Well, I'm not saying it's always right, because then I explain, well, that's not toxic. It's depending on concentration. Water is toxic when you drink a lot of it. But I always explain that a lot of claims, like dermatologists tested, mean nothing. Like zero, like nothing. Dermatologist tested means like, oh, I looked at the product, I'm a derm. Okay, good, And I feel that a lot of consumers are still relying on those claims. If you have super sensitive skin and you see vitamin C, dermatologist tested 20%, don't even touch it, because 20% is way too high if you have sensitive skin. It doesn't matter how many clinical trials they've done, because usually it's not done on people with sensitive skin. It's done on people with normal skin. So it's really educating yourself about the ingredients. And I always say, write to the manufacturer if you have any allergies or if you have any specific question. And if they can't answer it, then don't buy it.
ChatGPT, is that like the best place for consumers to go to, or it feels like there's got to be something else I could do, right?
Yes, well, there are a lot of apps, like obviously Environmental Working Group. There is Think Dirty. There is all these apps. But the problem with those apps, and that's why I don't recommend them, they all kind of have their own angle. And like Environmental Working Group, maybe 5 years ago, I said, go there. Now I say, don't even go there, because they almost don't rely on science. It's like they see propylene glycol and like, it's bad. They see some preservative and they say, like, it's bad, or phenoxyethanol, they say it's bad. It's a bad product. It's rated bad. Don't buy it. But the reality is, it's again all dependent on concentration. No one puts any toxic products on purpose, not here in US, in your products. And usually when you don't put preservatives, there will be mold in your products and bacteria growing. And if you put that on your face, that will be toxic for your face, right? And your skin. So I know that ChatGPT and Gemini and Perplexity is maybe not the answer, but what I found when I go to those sources of information that are constantly being updated and they pull from everywhere. They will give you not the best, but better picture than going to all those clean beauty websites.
Yeah.
It's maybe quite controversial from what you'll hear, but that's what, from my scientific background, that's what I see.
Yeah, and I know that you spent a lot of time in Europe. You grew up in the Netherlands. Is it different from a consumer mindset in Europe? I know there's a higher degree of rigor and licensing that needs to happen in order for somebody to be approved in the EU. Is that different than, say, a consumer that's looking for something in the United States?
I mean, to be honest, I would say no. You know, when you look at Europe and they say, oh, 2,500 ingredients are prohibited in Europe. Well, some of those ingredients are asbestos, which you obviously will not be putting in your skincare. So it's not like apples and apples. And yes, regulatory environment is different. But when you look at the brands that are very big in Europe, La Prairie, La Mer, etc., to be honest, 90% of the ingredients they're using, I would not be putting in my skincare.
Really? Wow.
And not because they are toxic, because it's all fillers to make it smell good. And I've used La Prairie for years until I couldn't. But it's really, it's all the fillers and silicones that make it smell well and glide well, mica that gives you that glow. So I would not say it's better. Like, I was trained as a Dutch PharmD, doctor of pharmacy, and making the products, medicinal products like that. And number one product we always use for medicinal skincare is petrolatum. If you say, and people are like, it's petroleum jelly, I'm like, no, it's highly purified petroleum jelly. But in all honesty, still after many, many years, it's one of the best hydrating and occlusive ingredient you can have if you have super sensitive skin. So there's a lot of misconceptions in marketing and ingredients, like in Europe, like I said, we would use petrolatum everywhere. Here, people often come to me and say, but why are you using it still in your skincare? And I explain, and when I explain, they understand. So it's really about the ingredients and concentrations that you are putting in there.
Kind of what I'm hearing too is it's not easy to understand this stuff.
That's true, but I do see now that the customer, at least my customer, I mean, she is extremely educated about ingredients and things that people ask me, and maybe they look up and maybe they've been around and traveled. But the question sometimes I'm receiving, I'm like, wow, that's amazing that you know this, or asking this question. And I encourage that, because then we can have a conversation why this product may be good for you and not this one.
That makes a lot of sense. We were kind of talking about regulatory there for a little bit. I want to go deeper there because you've grown up in the European regulatory market. You're obviously very well versed in the U.S. market as well. Can you talk to me about when you have an acquisition or a large investment that's happening, and they send in a medical professional to assess the business? What is it that they're looking for?
I think from the medical perspective, I would be looking, of course, at the claims, I think ingredients are important, the clinical trials, but that's almost already regulated. If you do a clinical trial with a good agency, like I said, it's done appropriately, you would assume. But you will be still surprised how many medical claims, even when it's a doctor-founded brand, right? Or derm-founded brand, or scientist-founded brand, how many medical claims are still wrong? And FDA obviously doesn't have time to go and inspect and go give you fines, but you see claims with the words in there, heal or treats. And these are all claims you can never use in skincare products unless it is the appropriate clinical trials are done and it is registered with FDA and approved by FDA. So I would look at those claims as a medical professional for the brand I'll be assessing.
Yeah.
And then see how much of those claims contributed for people buying it. Like saying, for example, it will treat your hyperpigmentation on your skin. That's a no claim for a skincare product that's not been approved by the FDA.
And so what should they say instead?
They should say may help reduce redness, or like may help increase hydration. You should always use those kind of vague. That's why all these vague marketing claims are existing.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting because if you are an astute consumer, you may find something that will work on your pigmentation, and you're like, "Oh, this is great. I know that this is a threshold. There must be something that's great." And so you just assume that they've been clear with the FDA, but the reality is that they haven't come back and caught that yet. And so it's almost again a catch-22 of can I believe what I'm seeing out there? And so it's just I don't know. It's just a very interesting, very messy area.
It is a very messy area, and you're right, it's very hard. If a customer comes and they ask me, like, I have this aging spot, will it help? I say, no, it will not. No skincare can really help, like, lighten that spot. You probably need to go to other cosmetic treatments, right? Go to your derm and see what they can do. And just being honest about it. You can't say it will take it away. Of course, you can say it will help even your skin tone, may help even your skin tone. And I think being honest about this, and that's why I'm saying when you see a customer buying a cream that helps them even their skin tone, and they come back and back and back and buy it, you assume it's working for them. It's doing something that they like that cream to be doing.
Yeah. What if it's a situation where there's a piece of UGC and someone says, "Hey, I use this product and it helped lighten my skin, like it helped these spots go away," and then the company decides to turn that into an ad and promote it. Is that okay? Because it's not them making the claim, but it's just them promoting a claim that they believe in that someone else said.
So that's not okay. Even if the creator, especially if you pay them money, they're making this claim, you have to take that claim away.
Yep.
If somebody bought your product and they're making this claim, obviously it's not you, but I as a company would comment that it is not intended to treat hyperpigmentation. Taking it and putting in an ad is absolutely no. That's a false medical claim, and there are really, I would think as a company you can be shut down.
Yeah. Wow. That's remarkable. You spent a lot of your time in the regulatory space, in the science space, and now you have a brand. You've had your brand for a couple of years now. When you think about advising other early stage brands, how should they think about their use of funds? In other words, how much should they be investing in validating the product works, and marketing and things like that, versus focusing on consumer acquisition or distribution or other aspects like that?
In the new age of Mokra, thank God, it's very different, because before you could just make a little concussion in your kitchen and launch as a product, right? Now it doesn't work anymore. So now we know that to launch a product, you have to do all these tests, possibly clinical trials. You don't need to, but you need to do stability testing and everything else. So I would say in the early stages, 100% of your funds need to go into R&D. It's really researching and developing the product and making sure it is doing what you saying it will do, and making sure it is safe for people to put on their skin. And of course, after you launch the product and the product is working, then I would put all the funds into making sure you tell the story, you acquire the customer, you do your marketing, you do your sales, you do a lot of outreach. And of course, once you see that people loving your product, coming back, or not loving it, then you need to understand why they are not loving it. Then again, you need to put some of those funds into changing your product or changing your formula. And that's kind of a cycle you should be doing. But in the beginning, it's 100%. And that's why it's hard to find bootstrap brands anymore, because it does require quite significant capital upfront to do
Yeah.
a proper R&D.
Or you're a chemist yourself and you're able to kind of vet those things out. But I guess even to then, if you're going to have a trial, it's more difficult.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about kind of science backed, but I want to change the conversation a little bit and talk about scientific rigor. What are some principles that you find most beauty brands maybe are a little bit lax on when it comes to being rigorous?
I think my answer would be different a year ago or 2 years ago before Mokra compared to now. Most of the brands now, I would say, launching with that rigor. During COVID, we saw like a lot of brands launched, right? And most of them were just making it in their, I would say, kitchen counter, you know. I would not know what scientific rigor they would be using, so that would be very hard for me to say. But now I think it's a very different story.
It's not dissimilar from someone who buys food at a farmer's market, right? Like, you kind of go into that and you expect it, like, all right, yeah, this looks like it's fresh baked bread. Probably didn't come from a commercial kitchen, right?
Most
Uh,
likely not.
probably came from someone's house. And there's like a threshold where you're okay with that. And I think it's an element where you're able to meet the person, you look to say, okay, do they have dirt on their fingernails, stuff like that. But then there's a threshold where it changes, and you would not necessarily accept those same sort of standards if you were going into Walmart and purchasing bread. And so I'm curious to know, what was the dividing line where they said, okay, I actually have to professionalize this because this is no longer a hobby, but it's an actual business.
That's a great question. You're absolutely right. If you just launch on your website and you know where else to be found, then you can do whatever you want, right? Because no one will stop you. And then you can sell and ship until somebody says, "Ooh, what is that? There is a mold in my skincare," or whatever they say. Which can happen also with big brands. Then with going into a retailer, especially such as Target, Walmart, Sephora, they have extremely, extremely stringent requirements. So you have to be professional. You have to have a contract manufacturer or your own facility with GMP, good manufacturing practice, good laboratory practice, FDA registered, not approved, but registered to be there. But in day and age, TikTok shop. Let's talk about TikTok shop, right? TikTok is here to stay, and you'll say, okay, it's TikTok shop, who cares? For us to launch on TikTok shop, I have to submit all my FDA registration.
Wow.
Of my facility, of my company, of each product that we wanted to launch on TikTok with its ingredient, with FDA registration letter, not approval, because we're not in derm offices, but registration. So TikTok wouldn't even look at my product if I did not have all that registered and FDA reviewed the ingredients and didn't flag anything. And that's just TikTok shop. If you want to be on Amazon, Amazon also has very significant and stringent requirements now. So you can't just be making it in your kitchen and hoping for the best. And that's a good question when you say, how do you know the brand did some testing? I would look, are they in TikTok shop? Are they on Amazon? Are they on wholesale channels? Because you also have to put those all that documentation in.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think in the absence of Mokra, retailers really became the gatekeepers of quality, right? They didn't want to be associated with bad products or faulty products or things like that. And so you're right, like getting into a retailer, and it sounds like even with TikTok and Amazon, is a huge threshold. It's a huge marker. If they're only selling on Shopify, maybe buyer beware. But if you're seeing them in another channel, then they probably don't have a separate SKU that is like worse than the other stuff. And so it's probably a good measuring stick to understand where they're held.
I agree. And and some people say, oh, it's made in America, it's better. If it's made in China, it's not. And that's not necessarily true anymore either, because when you look at even ingredients, like we make it here, but that's us. But there are also a lot of brands that make it in China or Hong Kong or India. And when you look at the manufacturers there, and the documents they provide you about the ingredient testing, their product testing is very is comprehensive. Maybe sometimes even more comprehensive than what you see here in US. So it's never like, oh, it's made here, it's great, it's made in China, it's bad. That's not anymore the case. Often you'll see a cheaper product at Walmart that can be doing better work than the product at Nordstrom. The price, while before we thought, oh, if it's expensive, it must be good, is completely not true in this day and age.
Oh man, that's interesting. Can you talk a little bit more about, as a consumer, if I see something that is FDA registered versus FDA approved. Is that really just speaking to more safety, or is there an efficacy claim in there as well?
Now, with Mokra, every product you sell should be FDA registered. So that's basically the baseline that we didn't have before. Before it was optional, now it's not optional. FDA approved, could be more safe, doesn't need to be. We just know that the studies to show efficacy and safety have been done for sure, if it is FDA approved. But it doesn't mean it will be more efficacious than product that is not FDA approved. And I know it's very vague and it's not helping anyone, but that's just kind of the truth of that whole gray zone in skincare. It's not like medicines.
Yeah. Yeah, but at the same time, it does feel that certainly in skincare and in some other aspects of personal care that we're kind of converging a little bit more into pharma, into more medicine. I saw that there was a study from UCLA where there's like this hair loss serum that is supposed to be doing really well. It's some peptide thing. And they're like, oh, yeah, you can't buy this, right? This is clinical trials only. And I'm sure that that's probably because they're not going to market it. They want to keep track of it for a while. In what ways do you see personal care becoming more like medicine? And is that a good thing?
It could be, but it doesn't need to be. There are some studies that I'm reading. Products are not on the market yet, but I'm following this one group. They have a great product. It's a cream that helps people who have cancer. They do a cancer treatment. And the cream reduces the rash, cancer treatment associated rash. So they can continue with the cancer treatment. So that's huge, right? Because you stop your treatment, cancer is still there. You continue, you help the rash, you continue your treatment. That's a great product to put on your face because it will renew your collagen production. You like its whole anti-aging, all this stuff that you want to have, which even though we don't talk about anti-aging anymore. But the problem was that peptide or that molecule, that if it's used all the time, not just 4 weeks, but like say 2 months, it is so strong, it can trigger cancer response.
Oh, goodness.
Right? So if it's not supervised. So that's again that line of, yeah, you can have a great molecule with great results, but if it's used not under specific supervision or not in specific cases, but you just decide to make a great cream of it, and yeah, your face will glow, but how safe is it? Like when it's cancer treatment, you look at the benefit and risk, and the benefit is slightly higher, is more than a risk, FDA decides on that in a clinical trial, you use it. In skincare, we don't want any risky products, right? We want a safe product. Maybe it's not as effective as FDA approved product, but we also don't want it to be so effective that it may cause something else. It's that balance that I would say sometimes less is more, and sometimes the older ingredients such as hyaluronic acid and glycerin are still the holy grail for me, because we have so much data, we have years and years of experience, we know what it does, and we know it's safe to use.
I hadn't thought about, the dosage and the frequency of use could end up having really adverse effects. And so it definitely makes sense that when you purchase something at a CVS or a Walgreens or whatever, you're expecting it to not hurt you, right? Like,
Yes.
and even if it says on the package, hey, use this once a week,
Yeah.
you can't really trust that people are literate these days. And so it's like, all right, you're gonna make sure you can manage for it.
Yeah.
As you look at the industry and you kind of see the acquisitions that are happening, whether it be a Medicaid or a Rhode, what is it that you see acquirers emphasizing today? Is it more around the unique chemistry, the unique science that they're placing a premium on, or is it, like you said, back to the fundamentals of, are they growing quickly and are they profitable? And I'm just wondering, kind of, if you had to think about where the pendulum is swinging today in terms of science back versus more lifestyle, where the market seems to be right now.
So it's interesting. Obviously, this year will tell. We've been in such a bad few years in terms of investments and the companies and acquisitions, but if we look at Rod compared to Ordinary, right? The Ordinary. So Rod was, these are great products, obviously, it's makeup, it's great products, they work, but it's also like virality of glowing skin, of Hailey Bieber being the lifestyle icon, right? Like I feel with Rod, they're still launching new products. They have this holy grail products that everyone loves, and it's associated with Hailey Bieber, and a lot of people want to be her. The way she developed her line was science-backed, was very scientific. She hired great chemists. They did a lot of research. So it's not just science-backed and new ingredients, it's also all the marketing that goes in it, right? The Ordinary, it was a lot of science and education, but it was simple ingredients, very understandable for everyone, with a trust and promise of very accessible skincare, right? And I think that resonates with understanding the science, understanding the one ingredient bottle and buying it for $10. You can't beat that. So they both had very unique propositions.
One thing that's interesting about beauty and skincare in general is that it does feel like it's cyclical, where especially when it comes to clean beauty versus science backed. And I think that in the mid 2010s it was all about clean beauty and like getting rid of things that were made in a lab and trying to use as raw ingredients as you could. And it feels that moment has somewhat passed. It's still important, but we're now kind of moving back into this pendulum of no, actually scientists are really good and you can figure these things out. And it's okay if it's highly curated and stuff like that.
Yeah, 100%. When I do my TikToks, I say natural is the worst. Like poison ivy is natural. Don't put it on your face. I know for people who have allergies, natural, and not because it's bad for you, it's just natural oil can have 30 different molecules, there are 30 different ingredients that you just don't know which one can give you a rash or allergy or redness. So now I see many companies, including us, we're moving more for synthetic and lab-made. And even, again, parallels with medicines. Most medicines, you saw something in nature that worked thousands of years ago. But now you take that plant and you extract that one compound that really, really works. And you purify it from other 99 that gave it, bad rap, So you're absolutely right. Moving to more precise skincare, precise ingredients, sometimes often lab-made, synthetically made, modified, so it doesn't contain the things that can give you a rash or allergy or anything else. Even look at vitamin C. There are so many types of vitamin C. Look at hyaluronic acid. Short chain hyaluronic acid will sit on top of your skin and plump your skin, and the long will go inside your skin and really regenerate from within. So just putting hyaluronic acid on the label doesn't mean anything. Like, you need to know, what are you plumping? Where is it working? Or do you have a mixture of all 5 of them? So you're absolutely right. And consumer is very educated. They ask me, what type of vitamin C are you using? Give me the chemical formula, like molecular formula. Is it L-ascorbic? Is it this? Is it that? Same with hyaluronic acid. What kind of molecular weight are you using? Is it low? Is it high? Etc. You're right. I think we move to more science-backed and more synthetic, more lab-made, and away from natural.
There's kind of this common trend line that goes through where I think it comes back to, are you continually innovating, right? Because I think that the pushback of why clean beauty even came about was to say, look at all these fillers, look at all these things. I don't know what this chemical is. I've never picked that from a tree or a berry. And so I'm wondering how much of this is just the consumer be like, yeah, I don't know what hydrochloric acid is. Like, it's acid. That sounds pretty bad. I don't want to put that on my skin. And just like, how much of it is the naivete of the consumer and people just saying, hey, here's something that's new, versus It's just this element of, continually pushing yourself and changing and having like a core formulation or core thesis that sits there, and you just change how you talk about it depending on how the market shifts.
Well, I think with the rise of social media and many beauty influencers who sometimes say the right things, sometimes say absolute craziness, and people listen to it. The education became a key, and people are much more educated, because I look at my 11-year-old son, who, like, he has 30,000 followers on TikTok, and he gets some products as influencer, and first thing he does, he puts the ingredient list in ChatGPT and says, is it toxic? What are ingredients I should not be using? He's 11-year-old. And he comes to me and says, oh, mom, there's phenoxyethanol. I'm like, that's okay. It's a small concentration. ChatGPT says it's bad, right? Immediately. But depending on what concentration. So I think with the rise of social media, we are not anymore even 3 years ago, where there was not so much awareness. You can go on TikTok, you can just ask a question, and there will be hundreds of videos saying one thing or another thing.
Yeah.
And as a consumer, then you do your own research and then go to the brand and ask that question. Like, is that the product that is good for me? It's a very different world now.
Yeah. You said your 11-year-old has 30,000 followers on TikTok?
I know, crazy.
Wow. Okay. We'll make sure he posts and shares this episode. This is great.
I will.
Leah, this has been a fantastic episode. If people want to learn more about you or kind of skincare in general, where would you recommend they go?
Well, if they want to learn about me, it's if you type Dr. Lee, you'll see the brand is Epilinks by Dr. Lee. So we do a lot of education, mainly on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. I think skincare in general, it's depending of your interest. Like I said, you can go on Gemini and Google. You can go on Reddit, which also there's a lot of craziness there. You can go on ChatGPT, but I also think you can also read scientific studies, but that can be more complicated to understand. But really kind of taking it all in and understanding, number one, what is good for me, because what is good for my skin will be very different. What is good for your skin, or what is good for my skin today, is very different than what was good for my skin a year ago. Because, like, I as a woman go through hormonal changes, I go through environmental changes, pollution, this, that. So something that you've used a year ago may not be good for you now. And that's what I see people coming and saying, oh, I used it my whole life and now I can't. Well, your skin may be sensitized for it. So I think always look, okay, where I am in my journey, in my life. Am I 11-year-old, or am I, 80-year-old or 90-year-old? And what works for me? And I think that's one of the most important thing, understanding, what's your skin like and what's your mood like and what do I want for my skin.
Love it. Dr. Leah, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and thank you everybody for tuning into this episode of Build a Business Worth Buying.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me on Build a Business Worth Buying, brought to you by Izba Consulting. I hope today's conversation gave you real insights into scaling smarter, selling better, and thinking like a strategic operator. If you found value in this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who's building their own sellable business. Until next time, remember, the real win isn't just building a business, it's building one worth buying.